This episode of Cell and Gene the podcast is brought to you in partnership with Thermo Fisher Scientific. Thermo Fisher's cell therapy processing instruments are designed to help customers transition from process development to commercial manufacturing, utilized as standalone devices or integrated as part of a closed modular process. Thermo Fisher Scientific recommends Gibco CTS DynaSelect Magnetic Separation System, which is a next-gen cell isolation and activation instrument. Gibco CTS Xenon Electroporation System allows customers full control to optimize for a variety of cell types and payloads. And Gibco CTS Rotea Counterflow Centrifugation System is a closed cell processing system supporting a broad range of protocols for cell separation, washing, and concentration. Customers can rely on and streamline their drug development process with Applied Biosystems QualTrack qPCR and dPCR quality control tools for robust and reliable genetic analysis across various phases of drug development, supported by relevant, compliant documentation. Hello, listeners, and welcome to this episode of Cell and Gene, the podcast. I'm your host, Erin Harris, and my guest for this episode is Robert Sexton, VP Program and Alliance Leadership at MustangBio, a clinical stage company with therapeutic modalities including hematologic CAR-Ts, ex vivo gene therapies, and more, which we will get into. But before we do, Robert, welcome to Cell and Gene, the podcast. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me. It's really great to be part of this.
Good. Well, all right. I want to jump right in by asking you to please briefly explain MustangBio as well as your pipeline. What are you working on as we speak?
Sure. So as you alluded to, Mustang is a clinical stage biotech. What that means that Mustang is not a research and development firm. Mustang works with strategic alliances and partnerships. So hence the alliance leadership component of my job title. So as you look, if you were to go to the MustangBio website and you look at our pipeline, you will see a number of different product classes like you alluded to, where we have the hematologic CAR-Ts, we have the ex vivo gene therapies, we have a really cool combination CAR-T program, which is a CAR-T in combination with an oncolytic virus treatment. And then you can also see that there is a up and coming in vivo CAR-T program that we are looking to add on. And that all comes through collaborations with academic research centers. So each one of those programs that I named is in collaboration with a really well-respected academic institution.
I want to talk a little bit about your role, VP Program and Alliance Leadership. So talk to us about, one, what that role is, what your responsibilities are, and within that role, what are your top concerns, priorities, challenges for this 2023?
Sure. So the role, I guess kind of starting with the me focused part of it. So in my role, right, I am part of Mustang's leadership team, right? I report into the CEO directly. And my role is to play kind of a strategic moderator in the organization. So we have, as I discussed, we have several programs that are in early development. And all of the activities that come along with that are underway within each of those programs. And so for any organization, and especially in the smaller biotech, the startups where resources are at a premium, this role is really about linking that organizational strategy to the business unit execution. So we have a team of program leaders that are within my business unit, and they own the channel in line like program management. So like we talked about the 106 program, for example, I have a program leader that owns that. He coordinates with the different business functions and develops that master plan for, what is the commercialization road for this program. So as individuals, my program leaders might be managing one or two or so programs depending on the size and scope, and their job is to partner with the business units. They're helping to prioritize resources. They're helping to, do like sequencing of activities, looking at cross-functional interdependencies, right? So, what is clinical doing versus regulatory versus the manufacturing and technology teams, and how do they ladder up to each other, and really making sure that people are aware of, for example, clinical wants to open a trial, and before they can open the trial, here's their dependencies, and then coordinating with those associated business functions to ensure that we optimize that sequencing of activities along the way. So that's kind of one component of it. And then the secondary component of it is, like I said, connecting the broader business. So there's the portfolio aspect of it, where we have a number of programs that are up, they're developing, they're starting to advance. Some of them are gaining momentum. So as they gain momentum, they become a little bit more time intensive, a little bit more resource intensive. And our organization, while we're managing that inline program, we're also looking across programs. And so, if priorities change, or we, as any development program will tell you, new information is coming in almost daily or weekly. So as new information is coming in, we're synthesizing that information. We're evaluating, what are our best options as it relates to resource deployment, or as it relates to the strategies around each of those programs. And so you kind of have this strategy within the program and then strategy across programs. And then all of that has to connect back to, the financial management aspects, right? What's our daily burn rate as it relates to each of those programs? So, and that's kind of the program leadership arm. And then each one of our programs is conducted in unison with an academic partner. Mm-hmm. And because of that, we also have that tie-in, right? So you have this agreement that's in place between our organization and the academic partner, and they have commitments, we have commitments, and so those commitments have to ladder into the master development plan. So it becomes it's like an orchestra, right? Everybody's got to play their role, and you have the program leadership team is working as the conductor. Our job is not to tell any of our business functions how to do their job. Mm-hmm. We may ask probing questions, we may facilitate conversations, driving toward the result of ensuring that each of our partners is aligned with that master strategy of the program, and that their activities are working in alignment with those core objectives.
Good. Okay. And so this role is exceptionally important and needed within the organization for all the reasons you just explained. For the clinical stage biotechs who are listening to this, talk them through why it is in fact a much needed role for their organization.
Sure. I think the simplest way to kind of lay this out is to think about the development of a product is, it's a multi-year journey, right? Mm-hmm. It is not something like a small project that, has a 2 to 3 month cycle and, a finite resource utilization and a very clear defined boundary, right? These programs are very organic. They're like, no pun intended, but they're kind of living creatures on their own, aside from being, the cell therapy. But what happens, right, is if you start and you don't have a clear understanding of what that endpoint is for your program and what those clear endpoints and those clear deliverables are, if you don't have a focus on that and you're not watching it, you set out on that development journey, which is, 3 to 5 years, depending on the dynamics that you're dealing with. It's very easy to go off target, right? So, I mean, you hear the old, adages with, for example, like with airlines and travel, right? If the airplane is pointed by 1 degree off from its target, when you get 3,000 miles away, they end up, 2,000 miles north or south of their target. And I think that same kind of thinking applies here to program management. So there's this constant, daily focus of looking at and evaluating tactically, where are we, what are we doing, are we doing the right things? But then somebody has to kind of come up, get above the treetop, so to speak, and look out over the horizon and say, hey, we're still on track for that trajectory. And I think that's the importance of the role. So whether you have a single program in development or you have multiple programs in development, you still have the complexity of aligning, whether if you're, a brand new startup and you have 10 people in your organization, or you're a little bit more of an established firm and you have, 100 or 200 people in your organization. That's a lot of alignment, right? And ensuring that those people are operating from the same mindset. They have a shared vision of kind of where are we going. They have a shared understanding of how do we get there in unison, right? Because if one of your groups runs out ahead, like say my clinical team goes out and they do all the work they need to do, and the regulatory team is not working at that same pace, that's just as bad as nobody doing anything, right? Because you want the program to move along at a nice, steady, consistent pace. So the importance really comes down to, having that group in place that's going to guide your organization through the turbulence of the drug development process. And I think everybody that is working in the cell and gene industry also has the added challenge of there's a number of areas where there's not a lot of clarity around what might some of the requirements be to advance in a certain area, or what is the right timeline to do things, right? In certain business functions, there's a prescriptive approach, that's handed down through the years that pharma's been up and running, and now everybody that's moving into the cell and gene product classes is having to reevaluate those tried and true operating norms. So I think that's the value of having these roles. It keeps the organization on task, and it connects the senior leadership conversations to the business unit level conversations, and then hopefully, right, it provides some good governance and good checkpoints for your programs as well to ensure accurate and rapid decision making.
Yeah, sure. And that's a good segue into my next question, because I was imagine that, rapid quality decision making certainly plays a part. And during your career, so you've spent time at Novartis, Sanofi, Legend Biotech, now you're at obviously MustangBio. How, not to mention that your responsibilities have included quality, operations, order management. How have those roles prepared you for what we know to be a very fast-paced cell and gene therapy world? So how does that past experience shape what you're doing now in your current role with MustangBio?
It's I would love to say that I had a real clear plan that I was going to be managing these cell and gene therapy programs. But, when I started my career, I actually came out into, biologics manufacturing and worked with, protein purification and protein sciences. And I had some really good mentors when I worked in that role. And, they had these really dynamic backgrounds. And I was like, yeah, I want to be like those guys. And they were general managers of the startup that I worked at. It was called Influence Systems. And I thought, I really would like to be a general manager. And they gave me some really good advice. And they said, listen, you need to know the organization from start to finish, get your manufacturing experience, get some good experience in clinical, get some good experience in commercial, so that you can speak on the whole continuum of the pharmaceutical model. So that's what I did. And so as you've seen from my resume, I've taken the opportunities to move, across business functions, and where I could find those transferable skills, and I could meet with people and say, hey, I'm currently doing this job, but I'd really like to learn this function. And I was able to facilitate those transitions in my career. So I've ended up having some leadership roles in clinical development and quality and commercial, and then ultimately leading into the CAR T space and the cell and gene therapy space. And what's been really helpful to me is that I learned the languages of clinical. I learned the languages of manufacturing. And I spent, I didn't spend 1 or 2 years. Like I spent, 5 or 6 years in manufacturing. I spent like 5 or 6 years in the clinical and quality side. And then I'm approaching, over 10 years now in the commercial space. And, so having that breadth of experience now in this cell and gene world, the silos that have existed traditionally across clinical and manufacturing and commercial are coming down. They have to come down, so when I was part of the launch team at Kymriah, right, first CAR T, we found ourselves, and I was in the commercial organization. I worked with, the order management and market access programs there and patient support programs. And I'm sitting in a room with supply chain people, and we're looking at each other saying, hey, why are we here? And our leadership, made it very clear, hey, you guys have to work together. And as soon as we started getting into the day-to-day management and preparing for the launch of that program, it was really clear that, not only did we have to work together, but we had, our people had to sit together in certain areas. So understanding, the nuances of product release all of a sudden became relevant to commercial people, right? And for supply chain people, concepts of customer experience and customer satisfaction became relevant, right? For the first time in history, pharma has a point of sale approach that, they've only had mostly like drop distribution or cold chain distribution. So they could produce, they could put it in a warehouse, and then they could have like a specialty pharmacy distributed or have a wholesaler distribute it. And now we're selling directly to the treatment center. So as that evolves, the need to understand each other's languages has become like almost like a table stakes requirement at this point. So it's been very helpful for me where, especially when launching the Carvykti program, working with Mustang, or working with Legend and working with Janssen, there was a lot of people coming in from two organizations, and being in the commercial operations function and having, that responsibility of treatment center operations and, the first point of sale, whether it be the digital components or the people components, I was able to, partner with our manufacturing and supply chain teams and our quality people and help translate a lot of, the requests that they had to my commercial leadership and explain, well, this is why they're asking for it. This is why it's important. Because for commercial people, it's a first time exposure for a lot of them. So when you talk about, hey, this product, in order to be released, had to meet these criteria, it doesn't meet these criteria, so we can't release it like this. Most commercial people were saying, well, I don't understand. Did they make the product or not? And so, walking them through that. So that's been my journey here. And so those past skills are really helping. And then in my transition now to Mustang, where my role has, end-to-end oversight, and I'm working with folks in the earliest stages of development. I'm having conversations where my commercial experience is highly relevant because they're thinking about developing the program for commercialization, and I'm able to sit with them and for example, whether it's the ex vivo gene therapy or it's the CAR Ts, they have to get from our facility to our patients, right? And the patient's material has to get from the treatment centers to us. And then the expectations that are evolving in the market from the treatment centers, they're all relevant to how you develop your product. So understanding those expectations, it's almost like part of your selling proposition. So if you can develop those dimensions of your selling proposition into your program, I think your likelihood for success as it relates to not only the clinical aspects of your program, but the in-market performance and the adoption of your product, I think that success rate or that probability of success goes up because you've been able to connect with your market in a deeper way earlier in development. So, and my team at Mustang, we're early phase 1, and I was actually pretty surprised at how relevant my experience is even at this early stage in the game. it's serving me well. I'm really happy I did it. Like I said, I wish I could have said, hey, it was all intentional. I planned it, and I knew I was going to be sitting here, and 20 years later. But the takeaway message of kind of where I'm coming from, and this is for any of the, I think the last I heard, there's some 900 startups in the cell and gene space at this point. And I can imagine that most of them are, early in their organizational life cycle. And, from a talent perspective, I can also imagine that there's not an abundance of people that have worked on, one cell and gene product, let alone multiple cell and gene products. So my thinking is that, creating that understanding that traditionally those business functions don't partner too deeply, changing that in your initiation of your organization, I think would be, really beneficial to ensure that the people that are running manufacturing and clinical and regulatory and all this groups understand that it is like an arm in arm exercise from, preclinical all the way through to, your phase 4 commercialization. So so short answer is it's working well because I know enough of the language of each area to help translate and forge connections between folks that maybe are not understanding each other fully.
Yeah, I think that's a critical component to having any successful therapy come to market and just, pushing any biotech company forward. I do want to talk a little bit about CMC. So, I mean, you mentioned, yes, the company has to work together cohesively, manufacturing obviously included. And you talked a little bit about, hey, there are silos, they're starting to come down though. Talk us through a little bit of that. What would you say are still the challenges facing us? What's getting a little bit better? And what would you like to see truly have been overcome in the next few years?
Oh, so CMC is, a pretty large topic, right? Where you talk about, CMC, has responsibility for, it's like your manufacturing recipe essentially, right?
Mm-hmm.
So there's a lot of components to it. I think for any organization, I think the work for developing, whether it's developing your assays or developing your starting material or vector strategies or what have you as it relates to your product, they're critically important. And then there's not a lot of clarity about how to interpret the requirements. I think there are requirements out there, and I think every organization is wrestling with, okay, well, how do I overlay these requirements to my particular program? And then, can somebody figure out how to generate more time? I think if you talk to anybody that's responsible for, like, whether it's assay development or vector sourcing or even vector development, they would say, I just need tremendous amount more time. And that's I've seen that, like, through the whole development program. And so maybe it's not necessarily that they need more time in the grand scheme of the product development, but I think a central theme that I'm seeing is that we need to evaluate, a lot of our critical steps in development for the potential to start earlier than what might traditionally be done. And I think that's the case with CMC, right? You're dealing with these cell and gene therapies, they're new product classes. It's new for the FDA from a regulatory standpoint. The people that I've worked with in my career to this point, most of them have tremendous amounts of experience with drug development, assay development, but these product classes present new challenges. And so for anybody, whether you're, a world-renowned expert or you're just, starting out in industry, if there's not an established kind of rubric around what you're working on, you are in the driver's seat of developing that rubric and those frameworks. So everybody that is working in industry and all of my colleagues and peers that have worked in the organizations that have fully commercialized a cell or gene therapy product, they have developed, the industry standards to this point, right? So for the folks at Novartis that put Kymriah out, and the Kite Gilead team that put Yescarta out in the cell space, there was no rubric. They had to create it. Novartis took risks in their commercialization program because they thought, hey, we need to do what's right for patients. We need to do what's right for the medical community. And, they evaluated those risks, and then those risks have turned into industry standards now, where, even the regulatory body said, yeah, that was the right thing to do. We agree. And those things have been supported. And I'm sure the Kite Gilead team had to do the same. I didn't work on that program, so I wouldn't be able to comment, but and I see that at Mustang. I saw it with my team at Janssen and Legend, that the products are different enough. And then, the organizational dynamics are different enough that you can't go and say, hey, I did this at Novartis and it's just a nice overlay and you can, replicate it. You have all of the internal dynamics of the organization to consider. The external dynamics in the market and the regulatory landscape are constantly evolving. So even now, as I transition to Mustang, the strategies and the thinking that was relevant, just three or 4 years ago with the Legend and Janssen program, maybe aren't so relevant anymore because the market has moved and the regulatory landscape has moved. So I think that's the challenge, even in CMC, is the body of knowledge is continuing to grow, and keeping up with that and incorporating that, whatever those new ideologies and new thinking are, into your approaches. It's a challenge. It's difficult.
Makes sense. One more question before we kind of formally wrap up. What is your advice to Cell and Gene, the podcast listeners? So you're talking biotech, biopharma, scientists, researchers, manufacturers, the whole nine. What would you tell them would be really good advice when they're planning for future scale up? Sort of top tidbits that you would offer them.
Yeah, I think that's a topic in all the conferences I go to. Everybody is kind of wringing their hands over how do we scale. And it kind of bridging off of my last comment, right? Like the body of knowledge and the status of the industry it's moving fast. So keeping abreast of that, I think, is kind of that's like table stakes at this point. But this product class, and this is my personal view, right? I think everything I've said is my personal view, but this one in particular is like near and dear to my heart, and it's probably divergent from what a lot of people would say. But pharma and biotech are in the business of developing drugs, and they've been in that business since the dawn of the industry. The cell and gene class and the precision medicine aspect of it brings just-in-time manufacturing, just-in-time point of sale. So all of a sudden we transition from that traditional development, sales, and distribution model to this new current state. Their capabilities and practices that pharma and biotech haven't had to develop experience in, but there's other industries out there that have. You look at, one analogy I love to use when I'm trying to solve problems in this space is, hey, airline industry moves, thousands of people at each airport every day, and as, pharma and biotech, in some of our programs, we're struggling to move, 100 patients in a year. Mm-hmm. Right. So that's kind of how I look at it, is that we're learning new things, right? And so being open to those new things, being able to look at your current situation with your product and find that overlay that works, that helps you have to simplify some of these complex topics and also try to get into the heads of your patient and your physician and your hospital systems that are your customer, and be able to understand that they're looking at you saying, you have to provide this product, as part of our engagement. And then they're thinking like, hey, they're out in the real world, they're using their iPhones, they're using the new current state of digital technology, and then they're looking at industry saying, hey, why aren't you guys doing that stuff, right? Why don't I have, just an app on my phone that, like, I can, click and scan through stuff, or hey, let it connect to my watch. And why isn't it as easy as that? Why isn't it as easy as scheduling an Uber pickup, right? So that's I think the overlay that the industry is dealing with, which is, hey, we're figuring out how to develop these drugs, and we're figuring out how to distribute these drugs, and do it in near real time. And the industry doesn't have a lot of touch time with that. So I think that's kind of one piece of advice, which is really look outside of industry for inspiration for how to solve these problems. That's been very helpful to me in my career, because I certainly don't have, I don't think I have any of the answers at this point after doing it for so long. It feels like even when you feel like you get your hands on something, it changes quick enough. And then the other component is flexibility, right? I see a lot of folks on different, whether it's in the different conventions or seminars that are happening in cell and gene, and they're looking for certainty in the guidances, and certainty in decision making. And there's a risk spectrum here to manage, and for every decision, there's not a very clear black and white solution. In most cases, it's which one is going to be least risky or highest probability of success. But even then, it comes with, well, here's the pitfalls. And then in any given situation, you might have 2 or 3 options to choose from. And so it's about your trade-offs. And so getting comfortable with making trade-offs, getting comfortable with integrating some level of risk into your planning, and then being open about that in your conversations with your colleagues, and saying, hey, I'm really uncomfortable about this, but this appears to be our best path forward. And then, as a team, you got to have the courage to then take that step. And that's hard. Cell and gene therapy is very challenging for those reasons alone. That's my advice, is that build in your time, try to do things as early as you can, be open to deviating from traditional development models and traditional development practices, with reason, right? Within reason. And I think that's a, always a good test is, does this make sense? Is it reasonable? If people are coming up with outlandish plans, there's probably a high degree of risk there. But if people are able to innovate on a concept, I think those are worthwhile considerations as you're charting your course in this.
Yeah, for sure. And I think, at one point here, you mentioned that you don't have any of the answers. I respectfully disagree. I think you have a lot of the answers and a lot of really good advice for our listeners. So that was exceptional advice, and, flexibility. Look to other industries for their best of breed, functionality to apply to cell and gene makes perfect sense. So thank you for that. We've reached the formal end of our discussion. And so I wanted to chat with you a little bit about, we're in 2023. Are you a resolutions person or not? If you are, what's your resolution? And if not, what are you going to be working on?
I am not typically a resolution person, but I do always look to start each new year. So, come January, I kind of reflect on, kind of where am I in my life? Where am I in my career? How are my relationships with my friends and family and my colleagues? And that's my starting point. And then I kind of set my own personal objectives, right? What are certain things that I want to achieve? And I look at it, for my own personal health and well-being, right? What are things that I need to do to improve in that space? And then, people are at the heart of everything we do. And as I've evolved in my career, I've really come to understand the importance of those relationships and building like strong bonds and trust. And so I always look to make sure that I'm maintaining old connections, right? Folks that I haven't checked in with in a while. I try to connect with those folks, and then trying to be open to making new connections. And I reach out to people as much as I can and just say hi, or if I see something, and I encourage people, if you want to reach out to me, I'm open to that. And I think that's, in the world that we're in now, right? There's social media platforms, but connectivity is different than having the social media platform. And I think that's for me is really striving to kind of, go above and beyond just the initial, connections that you get through social media, but to actually learn something about the people that I connect with. And it's hard, but it's something that I try to do.
Yeah, meaningful connections, absolutely. Good physical and mental health connections with the, uh, people who are currently here in life, people you're meeting in your professional and personal life, and making meaningful connections. I love it. Makes perfect sense.
Yeah, I think, for now it works, right?
Right, right, exactly. All right, listeners. Well, that wraps up this episode of Cell and Gene, the podcast. Thank you so much again to my guest, MustangBio's Robert Sexton. Robert, this was a lot of fun. Thank you so much. I hope you'll come back and talk to us again soon.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I appreciate the opportunity.
Absolutely. All right, everyone, check out cellandgene.com to register for our newsletter and tune into the next episode of Cell and Gene, the podcast, and we'll talk to you soon.